Toni Morrison's novel Jazz deals with fragmented memories of African American and their dilemma across different generations. Protagonists include Joe and his wife Violet, another character Phyllis. She is friend of Dorcas. In the beginning of the novel, Joe murders his young beloved Dorcas on the New Year Eve, who refuses to be carried to her hospital, and she dies because of overbleeding. After her death, she is stabbed by Violet because Dorcas Joe affair and afterwards Dorcas death that caused certain scandalous ripples in society, and that was a stigma for Violet. She couldn't tolerate it and she stabbed it. Afterwards, both husband and wife, they had some tense relations, and Joe mostly was lost in his memories, and they were unable to find a mean of a reconciliation through fragmented memories of Joe and certain memories of Violet. We come across, we come to know their actual stories. In fact, the Violet somehow had better understanding of her past, and it is found in her stories that she was brought up by her mother, True Bell, who was a good storyteller, a slave, and even being a slave, because of her uh, power of storytelling, she influenced the masters and masters' children. Uh, Violet's father was a political activist. He lost during Ku Klux Klan riots. He was imprisoned and he died in prison, while his mother, who couldn't bear racial discrimination as well as domestic burden, she jumped into the well and she committed suicide. After the death of her parents, Truebell took responsibility to bring up Violet. So Violet was a parentless child who grew up in post-slavery time by a former slave who never bothered for her independence. And on the farms of her grandmother's master, I mean William's farm, there was a lady, the daughter of True Bell's master, that is called Alice Gray, and she fell in love with a black man and she married him, and she gave birth to a boy who is called Golden Gray. Golden Gray was a mixed race, mulatto or half black, half white. That boy, when there was separation of or forced separation of her mother and her father, he didn't know about his father. He thought himself white but he was ridiculed in his school as a black boy. He was neither black, purely not a purely white. So he raised questions about his identity and he made up his mind to find his true origin. Ultimately, he went in search of his father, and there were, through the stories of True Bell, he actually imagined that his father was in a forest. He reached there in search of a man, of his father. At the outskirts of forest, he met a woman. That woman is called Wild in the novel. And Golden Grey was fascinated by her dumb, by that dumb black woman. Though he continued his search and he succeeded to meet Henry Lee Sutroy, though that might be his father. But he didn't admit it. And when he was returning, he found Wild, a pregnant woman there, and he took with her. And rest are just assumptions whether Wild was, because Wild is the woman who actually appears in the memories of Joe as well. And Joe is a boy who was brought up by Henry Lee Story. So Joe may be son of a Henry Lee Story, he may be son of a Golden Grey, or he may be son of someone else. So both Violet and Joe, they were orphan, they were parentless, and when Joe from forest came to the farm and they were attracted towards each other, they fell in love and they decided to marry, and they decided to leave the plantation and migrate to city. They came to New York, a city that offered them opportunity, freedom, residence, but it couldn't provide them a reliable, a prideable, memorable history of their families. Probably that's the reason they married, but they didn't give birth to children. With the passage of time, something unsaid that crept in their relationship. Probably they thought city would be an ideal place. That was not. It was much better as compared to their previous locations, but it was still a city that had racial discriminations as well. And that was even observed in very serious matters like in health treatment in hospitals. And we can say that's the loneliness of Joe that led led him to Dorcas, and because of their age gap and sentimentality of Dorcas who was actually warned and strictly ordered by her aunt not to indulge in any drinking, dance, parties, and so on. She found a refuge in Joe. That was not actual relationship of love. It was more of an outlet of their wants, which they looked through each other. And when Dorcas tried to show some distance, Joe became violent and he caused Dorcas' death. And no, they were trying to understand themselves, understand their past. Violet also met Dorcas' aunt, and through the memories of Dorcas' aunt and racial discrimination in St. Louis State, her migration towards city of New York, and later on Dorcas migration, death of Dorcas' parents, all these events ultimately help them to feel a bond for each other. And one friend of Dorcas, she plays the role of bridge, not only uh, between Dorcas' aunt and Violet, but also between Violet and her husband Joe. And towards the end of the novel, we feel somehow there is a warmth of a relationship that is experienced by this couple. Jazz novel has several themes, mean fragmented memories of slaves, power of folklore or power of storytelling through character of Truebell, motherhood and motherhood at different generations, mean Rose as mother, Truebell as mother, Alice as mother, and Violet as mother. Um, Jazz as cultural representation, jazz age, and resurrection of African American consciousness. So these are the themes. Novel, as we have discussed, Toni Morrison tries to blend different traditions: realism, surrealism, magical realism, and art of African American storytelling. They are blended in her work.